Okay, so Attorney Adrian Middleton here again. So now what I'm going to talk about is the audit process that is the next process after the stop recorder, but they're one and the same, but it's what flows from the stop recorder. So you've gotten the stop, now they've given you the request for production of business records. Wow, when you look at this list, it is expansive, isn't it? So if you have your request for production of business records, go ahead and get it out. And what you'll see is it's asking you for almost everything under the sun. It's a literal shotgun blast just of anything and everything you could give them, okay? Now, what's interesting under the statute, you don't have to provide everything in that request for production of business records. So you might just need to provide a couple of things, but you don't know that unless they tell you that. And so the department has base penalties off of cash ledgers. They have base penalties off of notebooks that people have just made notes in about their transactions where they have no QuickBooks detail or even a bank account sometimes. They've literally calculated penalties off of a handwritten note. So when you first look at that request for production of business records, it's extremely intimidating because it is so vast, and a lot of things on there you may not feel comfortable with showing the state. So it's important to talk to an attorney about, one, what is deemed sufficient records, because under the statute, all you have to provide is what are sufficient records to allow the department to calculate a workers' compensation premium penalty against you and use that multiplier, okay? So that's number one. So that means you don't have to provide everything. And it's important that you understand what your records mean before you provide them, because again, as I've talked about, if you provide certain items to the department, they could actually use that as evidence to charge you criminally with a third-degree felony. So it's important. This is a very important phase that if you don't want to hire an attorney, that's fine, but hire someone that knows what they're talking about. You don't want to just give your records over to the state without ever even looking at them. It may be the case that you would pay a much higher penalty if you did, when if you had not turned over records and gone through the process of imputation, that you may have had a much lower penalty based on the imputation. So what is an imputation? Well, an imputation is a remedy that the state legislature allowed, in which if you don't want to turn over records or you cannot provide records that are sufficient, a penalty can still be calculated, okay? So it means that a lot of scenarios could be the cause for that. You may not have enough records in your possession. Maybe there was a storm, a hurricane that destroyed your records and you don't have them. Maybe your bank has closed and you can't even get the records from the bank. Those would all be instances which you would be eligible for an imputation. But maybe I shouldn't use the word eligible. I mean, in actuality, if you just ask for an imputation, they'll base it off of what they observed on the job site that day. And so an imputation is different for everybody. And it's another reason why you should speak to an attorney, because qualified attorneys can actually calculate almost to the up to the penny. They can calculate almost to the penny of what your penalty will be if they just know the facts of what occurred that day on the job site. So if you think about it, know what happened that day. If you're trying to figure out an imputed penalty, think about a snapshot of the job site that day. How many people were there? What type of work were they doing? How long had they been there? All of these things are factors that are used to determine an imputation penalty calculation. And again, an imputation penalty calculation would mean that you do not have to provide records to the state if you do not want to, or if you cannot. You will be penalized, but at least it's something that you'll know what it's going to be, as opposed to your records. If you're looking at your records, unless they've been fully audited, and we do audit records here at our firm, and I used to be a penalty calculator for the department, so I'm very familiar with the audit process at the department because I helped create their penalties when I worked for them. Make sure you know what you're giving the state. That's the number one thing, because you will be penalized off of whatever is in there. And once you give it to them, they are under a statutory obligation to actually do what the statute says. And what the statute says is they are going to penalize you if you deserve a penalty. So again, be careful what you provide to the state, understand what you provide to the state, understand there could be criminal consequences to it, and speak to an attorney if you can afford to do so, or someone who is knowledgeable about stop recorder penalty assessments.